Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I wish you welcome to this panel about best practice in data centers in today's world. And before starting the panel, I would like all of our participants to introduce themselves briefly in a few words, and then we'll start with a few questions. Martijn, why did you start?
My name is Martijn Kooiman. I'm commercially responsible for TeleCityGroup in Amsterdam. There's a couple of slides on TeleCityGroup later on, so I'll leave it for that.
So I'm David Foy, International Business Development Manager at ebrc, Data Center, Cloud and Managed Services. Same as Martijn, we have some slides on that later as well.
Hello, my name is António Ferreira. I'm the CEO of Lunacloud, which is a customer of data center. But in my previous life, I also was the managing director of Clarinet, and we used to run 16 small data centers across Europe.
Yeah, and I forgot to introduce myself. So I'm Gerard Hoffmann. I work for Telindus, and Telindus is part of the Belgacom group. And in Luxembourg, we do use data centers and provide telco services to our customers. I thought that as an introduction to the panel, it would be good to go through the slides of Martijn, who addresses the main challenges of data centers today. And so I would invite Martijn to go through his presentation briefly and then enter the discussion.
So, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So, well, thank you for joining us today. I think it's safe to say that clouds live in the data center, and getting a data center strategy right is critical for the quality of the services that you're able to provide as a cloud provider. Maybe could just show of hands, how many in the room are actually associated with a cloud provider? So who actually provide cloud services to their customers? Okay, thank you. Like I just said, my name is Martijn Kooiman. I've spent half of my career working at a cloud provider and the other half selling data center services to cloud providers. And currently responsible commercially for TeleCityGroup in the Netherlands. And in this presentation, I just want to touch briefly on a couple of best practices that we've learned throughout our 12 years of experience providing data centers for cloud providers. Now, you might know TeleCityGroup. We are a leading provider of carrier-neutral data centers across Europe. We operate 29 facilities and counting within Europe in key connectivity hubs, so the major cities that have a very strong connectivity infrastructure. We are a data center specialist, which means that we don't do anything else than data centers, which means we have a very strong focus and all our people and resources are focused on having these data centers up and running all the time. We believe very strongly that the quality of our people makes a difference and not so much the technology. So we have a very good story about the technology that we use and the efficiency and everything that comes along with it. But people are really our most important asset. Now, like I said, the cloud lives in the data center, and these are some of the references that we have throughout Europe as companies that I would say are part of the cloud community. We have an ongoing discussion with these customers about what they find important when they choose a cloud provider. And best practices is a kind of a large word to use, or a large saying. Looking at these kind of customers, I would say the majority of our customers make their money online, which means they depend heavily on the quality of our infrastructure. And some of them are resilient across multiple data centers, and some of them are simply completely reliant on us doing our job correctly. I would say over all of our customers, it goes that they expect us nowadays not only to implement best practices, but also to work actively with them to develop them and drive them in the community or in the data center community. And I've just put a couple of things on the screen, 4 things. I'll put them on the screen, which are the topics that they discuss with us, which they find important. Flexibility from a data center provider seems a simple thing to do, but it's not. I put it on the screen as being be flexible, not just scalable. And scalable is often confused with flexible, but it's not. We can scale, yes, but we can also scale down. And cloud providers that have seasonality influences are very interested in these kind of things. And this has to do with the way you determine your technology. Maybe we'll get into that a little bit later on. Let me just see, I have the wrong... Oh, there we go. Now, having the technology in place to do this properly also requires that you don't just build technology for the average user, but also are able to maintain customizations. And in data centers nowadays, it's very easy to get caught up in, oh, I standardize, so I know my service is always going to run 100%, and the customer is just going to have to buy what I provide. Which is obviously not the case when you're working with the customers that you saw on the screen that have maybe 80 data centers in use worldwide and have a standard. So it's very important for us to standardize as much as we can, but for the last part, we're able to customize and be flexible. That's one of the things that we've learned the last couple of years. Latency matters. So the cloud is nothing without connectivity, obviously. And the cloud services are about user experience, so the quality and availability of connectivity increases the quality of the services of the cloud provider. So what we've learned is that we build data centers not so much in any location and then try to get the connectivity in, but we build data centers where the connectivity actually is, like I said, in the main connectivity hubs throughout Europe. And we invest heavily in getting carriers and internet exchanges on site to give our customers freedom of choice. Simply within our data centers, depending on which one you're in, of course, but it can be up to hundreds of networks that are competing for your business as a cloud provider. Simply put, the cloud provider benefits from freedom of choice and a better user experience at lower cost. Now, this is always an interesting one, specifically at a conference like this. It's taking responsibility for energy efficiency. And yes, it comes from technology, but it's also very much about expertise. And it's also very much about costs and about a competitive position. Simply put, if we decrease our energy consumption, we decrease our costs, which makes us more competitive. And that only goes if you actually are able to pass on those decreases in cost to your customers, which is something that we do. On the screen, just two examples of some recent things that we've developed or deployed in new data centers. What you see on the left here on the screen is a greenhouse that's connected to our data center in Paris, which is actually uses the waste heat from the data center to maintain the temperature. And on the right, you see a very schematic thing. It's a aquifer thermal energy storage system. Basically what we do is we store the excess cooling capacity that every data center typically has in a climate like Amsterdam. In the winter, we store that in the ground and use it in the summer when every data center typically doesn't have enough cooling. So we kind of even out the seasonality influences across the year. For those that know something about data center capacities, we have 7 megawatts of guaranteed capacity provided by Mother Earth, which is obviously a very nice thing to have. And that's something we did in our last Amsterdam data center, but it's very regional based. You can either do this in the region where you're in or you're not, or you cannot. The last point, transparency. It's very important for us as TeleCityGroup to be auditable for our customers, because our customers are audited and they then want to audit us as well. So it's a chain and everybody has to work together. It means our processes have to be transparent, they have to be simple and easy to understand. And the bottom line is, if you don't invest in opening up these kind of things as much as you can, of course, within our reasons of confidentiality and those kind of things. But if you're able to be auditable, that is definitely something that our customers require and simply need, otherwise they will not do business with you. So this is something that we've done, and we've kind of invested in the process because literally we're audited every week nowadays, and we might as well try to make it fun for everyone involved. So that's basically the 4 topics.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Martijn.
You're welcome.
So you're saying that flexibility, latency, energy efficiency, and transparency are the challenges of today's data centers.
Yes.
Maybe while David, you set up your presentation, António can give us his perspective on these 4 challenges as a customer for data centers. António, give us your perspective. David is setting up.
Okay, as a customer, when I look to data center spaces, I look for one thing called PUE, which is power usage effectiveness. So the lower consumption, the better. The better the price as well. So it works both ways. Also, I look at things like certification, which I believe are also very important, like the ISO 20000, ISO 27000, which relates to security as well, 9000, PCI, etc. So, and the third point would be carrier neutrality. I don't know if some of you have been on the room C1. During the presentation of a company doing cloud performance assessment on cloud providers, different cloud providers, and being close to customers is essential. So having a secure space which is energy efficient is very important, but being close to customers is also very important. So carrier neutrality, the ability to connect to any network available within a country is also an important aspect for me.
Yeah, more specifically, António, do you see anything different in the cloud from a few years ago that would need different designs in data centers? Is there anything specific that is changing?
Well, I believe that for data center providers, the biggest, they need to be more efficient in terms of energy. That's a trend that is going, that started many years ago and is continuing. Something else that I believe is happening is the concentration of processing power and data storage capacity on the same square meter is increasing a lot. So the challenges for data center providers are being able to cool efficiently the same amount of space, but that consumes a lot more power than 10 years ago, if I can resume it this way.
Would you agree, Martijn?
Definitely. I mean, I think we're at about a 15-fold of power usage per rack nowadays, as opposed to 10 years ago. And providing the power is generally not the issue. It's always the cooling, as you say. Luckily, the technology is available. The problem is it costs a lot of money. So it's part of the business case, taking into account. Let's just say I've had customers that have asked us, I'm going to do 20 or 25 kilowatts in a rack. But on average across our estate in Europe, I think we average about 3.5 to 4 kilowatts. Yes, we have customers that do 15. Yes, we have customers that do 12 kilowatts in a rack. But the average is still very low. And that's what I said. You can design expecting customers only to do 12 or 15 kilowatts in a rack. But the trick is designing at a level that you can accommodate that, but also on average still remain efficient when customers do less. So yeah. Totally agree, yeah.
All right, David signaled me that he's ready now for showing some slides. David, would you also try to put the focus on the challenges of the cloud? Maybe what makes you special in the cloud area?
Sure, just to come back quickly on what Martijn just said there. When you look at the end client who's taking up data center space, there is obviously a density issue. We've got people running at 30 kilowatts, but if you look at what people actually ask for and what they actually use, there's a lot of ego involved. So a lot of people come to the table and say, I need 10 kilowatts, I need 12 kilowatts, and when you actually look at it, they're actually using only 40% of what they're actually asking for. So that's another challenge for designing the data center, is actually aligning what people are saying with what they're actually doing. So going on to my couple of slides here now. I'll try and get through it quite quickly so we can get on for some lunch. I always seem to have the speaking slots just before lunch. Okay, so give you a couple of words on who we are. So ebrc is E-Business and Resilience Center. We're a data center operator in Luxembourg. We have 5 data centers. We have just under 20,000 square meter of data center space, which is approximately half of the Luxembourg capacity for data center. What makes us different is that we have 2 certified Tier 4 data centers. We're the only company in the world who has 2 certified centers. Soon we'll have 3. We provide managed services, anything from monitoring equipment to providing entire solutions. So that's people coming along with their application, dropping it onto an infrastructure that we design, build, and operate. We are part of the P&T group. We're owned 100% by P&T, but we're completely neutral. We're a carrier-neutral data center. And something which is very poignant to today is that we're actually trying to get away from that sticker of being a data center operator and be a service provider, so providing value on top of it. We'll come on to the certifications later on, which is something that it's very important for us, and I'm happy that it was brought up earlier. Commissioner Reding was saying earlier on that trust is the biggest problem in cloud, and I'm going to try and show you how we address that. If we look on here, you can see that we're a confirmed player in this arena. Best data center operator, best hosting provider, best risk mitigation, best everything you want to see. At a European level, so that's already benchmarked European and confirmed on the local market as well to make it coherent. And that is enough propaganda for today. I wanted to share this with you. The person you see here is the ex-income tax commissioner for the Indian government. And I would really suggest you look this up. It's on YouTube. Just do a search for cloud computing India. And what this guy is saying is, if I put all my stuff into the cloud, it's all well if it's sunny when I put it into the cloud. But what happens if it starts raining? Is my data going to be dispersed everywhere? So what he said here was, if it starts raining, my personal data might be splashed all over the jungle somewhere. He's actually quite convincing in his explanation of why not to use the cloud. So I'm going to try and be convincing on why to use the cloud. And we'll come back to Vishay later on. So the biggest problem that we have is actually getting to the cloud. Martijn mentioned it earlier about carrier neutral, about having hundreds of telco providers. It is the biggest issue that you have, is actually getting to it. And today, typically, when we talk about the cloud, we're talking about connection through internet. So internet, for those of you who remember the old, I think it was Excel or Lotus, it was Lotus 123, wasn't it? WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. That's pretty much the standard across an internet connection. You get the capacity that's given to you at that time. There's no latency guarantees, etc. So the first thing that we can do is open up all of the carriers. So ebrc, we have 27 national and international carriers, so you have a choice of diversity of networks. But on top of that, we also have the Luxembourg Ethernet exchange, which is where all these carriers can come together and interconnect and provide level 2 connectivity across the network, which will give us then Ethernet connection from end to end through whichever route it needs to take, which gives us predictable latency, which internet won't, and it can also provide the testing for the quality of service. So first of all, best practices, it's got to have something to do with connectivity, making sure that people can get in and consume what you've got. What happens once you get into the playing field? What do people want to find? Well, they want to find everything, right? Something that I find is quite amusing is X as a service, because everybody comes up and they want to consume and they don't want to pay, right? So if we look at, what is it, 8 o'clock on here, they want it cheap, which is probably the biggest point in here. So best practices for us is obviously providing all of these services, applications as a service, software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, X as a service, but doing it in a way that people can consume it and trust the provider that they're consuming from. So if we look across here for our trusted cloud, as we've dubbed it, there's 3 points. There's the governance, risk mitigation, and also the compliance. So I'm not going to go through each one of these points here, but you can see that certification is a big point of it. Typically, if we're talking about best practices in Europe might be different to best practices in the US. Best practices being what it is, it's a benchmark. We should always try and surpass that or use it as a basis to go forward. Again, Commissioner Reding this morning was saying, you know, get rid of all of this inter-country standards and try and put one global standard for Europe, and then America might align. So for us, what's important is the security of the data. We are a company that prides itself on processing critical and sensitive data. Just an example of that, in our cloud, for example, we are doing genetic research, so biomedical sequencing. It's highly critical, it's highly confidential information. It's not the sort of thing that you want to put into a public cloud where you don't know where the resources are, you don't know where the disk is keeping it. So as far as security goes, we're aligned with the Cloud Security Alliance, which provides the 98 control objectives. So each part of our cloud is controlled and it's managed in a stable, auditable environment, something very important that came up from Martijn from TeleCity's speech earlier, needs to be audited. So all of those points we've put into engagements. So these are our best practices, if you like. This is our best practice charter. So the guarantee one is the quality of what you're going to get. The quality based on everything is in-house. It's all done by our people. Again, another interesting point. Our human resources are our forte. The awards that we've won to show that we are capable of delivering it and we are capable of servicing the data, but also securing it. Corporate governance is something very, very important as well. If I want to contract cloud services, I want to make sure that my data is safe, not just today, but in the future. What happens if that company goes under and I've got my critical processing on it? How do I get that information back? So the fact that we have a AAA shareholder in the Post and Telecommunications means that we have that long duration of life of the company. Security and risk management, so we spoke about that, ISO 27, ISO 20000 for the next one, which is service management, PCI DSS, which is very important for e-commerce, so everybody doing their business online, obviously want to take payments. If it's B2C, it's going to be credit card. High availability through our data centers, so making sure that the data is there, making sure that it's coherent, making sure that it's the integrity of the data is kept. Neutrality is something very important as well. My scope is specifically development of the US. If I go to the US, first of all, we have to tell them who Luxembourg is, which is always getting up early in the morning and explaining that. But also as a carrier-neutral environment, but also as a company, because the P&T obviously is owned by the state. And the US, they don't like anything that's got to do with governments, specifically their own. And specifically governments in countries they didn't even know existed. So, you know, this is all hard work. Point 7 is important, and it's my last point, is the green side of it. So it's guaranteeing that we're doing our part to make sure that the Earth is sustainable. We've installed Kyoto cooling in our latest data center, which reduces power consumption by something like 80%. Power being the biggest, cooling being the biggest power beast of the data center. So that's something we're quite proud of. Going back to my friend, just before the end, this is what I explained to you before. If you're putting your data into a cloud and it's all sunny that day, you can relate this to anything, right? If he's saying, if it's sunny, it's good, and if it's raining, will there be aberrations? Will the data be corrupted? It's the same as an engagement with a service provider. If we're all smiling and happy when we engage a contract of service, you put your information into my cloud, what happens if our relationship degrades? Is your service going to degrade with that? Am I going to have a problem reversing your data back to you? So the weather may change, but the service is always guaranteed. And that, you'll be happy to hear, is that. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Interesting. Can I ask you a question, David? I would be interested to hear how you see the life cycles of data centers today. I mean, we've been building data centers for, you know, a life duration of 20, 25 years, lifetime. And with the cloud accelerating, you know, the convergence from fixed to mobile, I mean, there's going to be an explosion of new technologies that will go into the data center. Do you think that this life cycle is going to shorten? And if yes, how are you managing that to swap from one data center to the next?
Well, it's an interesting point. There's different points of view on this. I've spoken to some people who say that with technology, the data center is going to have to be more dense, so meaning more power to the rooms. I have other people saying that technology is going on so fast that the power consumption is reducing. Is there going to be data center consolidation? Do we have too many data centers? ebrc has been on the market for 12 years now, and until this year, we've put an average of 1,000 square meters online per year. I don't see that slowing down. I do see the technology we're using changing to adapt to the business that we're actually serving out of our data center. So if you look back 10 years ago, the financial sector was using big mainframes, not using much power, not generating much heat. Today we're servicing cloud infrastructures which have so many X hundred processors in a rack burning up power. We are building data centers to last. I don't know if 25 years is going to be sustainable over time. Are data centers going to become more disposable? Are they going to be aligned specifically to the critical nature of businesses? So I noticed Amazon on one of your slides, they will come in typically and take half of your capacity. Is that reusable capacity afterwards? I don't know. What I do know is that quality is what's driving it today. So data centers need to be built to last. They need to go for that 25 years, but I don't know if they will actually, in a technical point of view, be able to serve for that long.
Okay, thank you, David. Along those lines, it's also about, the question is also about cost. Will we not see an emergence of more, regional data centers that will cost half of what big data centers today cost, and will they not accommodate the new generation of cloud services and make and trigger a paradigm shift somehow? Martijn, maybe you can address that.
This is a very interesting one for us. We build 6,000 euros a kilowatt, where you can build at 3,000 or 2,000 euros a kilowatt. It depends. Will the cloud need more resilience from the technology, or will the cloud need experienced operators with people that know how to actually manage the technology? That's basically what it comes down to, because the technology is only part of the deal. The financial strength that you have to keep on building new capacity in the markets that your customers are demanding from you is important. The ability to innovate has to do with the expertise and knowledge that you have. And these are the things that we typically see regional or more inexperienced data center providers struggle with. So in that sense, we're still very much able to compete. And if it turns out that cloud makes our customers so unreliant on the data center because they're simply relying on multiple data centers at the same time, and if one fails, they don't care, then we'll probably refrain from building tier 3 plus or tier 4 data centers and go back towards what the market is asking us to, and that might be tier 2 plus or something closer to the general tier 3 design, which will cost a lot less. So it depends, it depends very much on the technology that the customers actually install in the data center. I must say though, the important thing, like I also addressed in my presentation, is that getting a very efficient data center, say 6,000 or 7,000 square meters at a very efficient level, at a PUE of 1.25, for instance, what we build at in Amsterdam, that's very hard to do if you're a new player in the market. So that gives us an automatic type of cost advantage in our operational costs. But the capex, yes, we build data centers which are capex heavy.
António, maybe you can elaborate on that same question. How do you see the longer term evolution of the data center world and also the cost dimension of them?
Well, my personal perspective is to look for more expensive but better data centers. So I'm always using tier 3 or tier 4 data centers, although we all know that we can host in a tier 2 data center for half the price. But the cost of an outage or the cost of duplicating technology to make the redundancy is more than the cost of the better data center itself. So I think the trend is to build more, probably more efficient and safer and more secure data centers rather than the opposite.
Could one of you elaborate a bit on the challenges that are, if any, posed by the trend towards mobile? I mean, we all know that with all the mobile devices coming out, there's a move from fixed to mobile connectivity, and applications will have to be mobile in the future to survive. Does that move have any impact on the data center itself, or is it more a telecom challenge? Would any of you have an answer to that question? David?
I'll take a go. It's obviously very much a telecom issue and application provider issue. The data center is still just going to be providing power and cooling to it. So we might see a shift in that the e-commerce side of things might generate, because what means mobile normally means e-commerce behind it somewhere. But from a strict data center point of view, I don't think it has too much impact at all.
Martijn?
I agree with David. It's very much a telecoms thing. It does mean for us that the diversity and choice of networks in the data centers becomes more important. You want to have multiple routes, of course, available. And sometimes there's very niche type players that customers want to connect to. So that is something that's important to us. But from a data center technology perspective, it is still power and cooling. Generally higher than average density equipment, what we see. Yeah.
Yeah, we've all seen that gaming as an activity has grown. Customer demand for gaming is growing in the IT or e-commerce world. What would you consider as specific challenges to that particular industry? Is it something that will make your data centers change, or is it similar to other demands? Maybe Martijn, you can start.
Yeah. The challenge with the gaming companies that we work with is generally that they have a title that they're releasing, which they build capacity for, and the title is either going to take off or it's going to crash and burn. And that means that they have to be ready for some sort of capacity, but have a ramp-up plan in case it gets successful. I mean, they're going to be very happy, but they're going to be very busy at that point. So that's what we see, is that the scalability, which I also touched on, David, as well, is very important, specifically for gaming companies, because it's simply too hard to predict in terms of massive online role-playing games, for instance, the usage that you get and the type of equipment that or the quantity of equipment that you need to install. We've literally seen customers go from, oh yeah, I'm sure it will fit in 10 racks, to something that is about 10 times that in a year. So it can be I think it's much more a challenge for the cloud company than for us. So in that for the gaming company than for us, to be honest. But that is you need to be prepared for that. Yeah, it needs to be part of the discussion when you first start talking to each other.
Right. David, anything to say on gaming?
Yeah, I think they're probably the most interesting customers to do business with. In the fact that decisions are taken very quickly. Again, it's a time to market issue. Just to put that into context, and again go into releasing a title, we have a gamer in our data center who delivered 6 tons of servers, which went into something like 22 racks, 6 kilowatts each, and that was to beta test one game. Just to put it into context for you. He put in 40 gigs of IP transit into there for the beta testers to get into it. That's an enormous cost, and that's just to test one title. If that works, that will explode. If it doesn't work, he needs to pack up and go home. So the biggest problem we have is not in actually providing power and cooling or data center space, but it's how do you draw up a contract for that? How do you actually make sure that the business that you're doing with that person is successful? He's a guy who's going to say, hey, it's working really well today, I need another 40 gigs. And for those people who are sort of telco in here, 40 gigs is a lot of capacity. And when you say, well, it's going to take 6 to 8 weeks to plug it in, they don't want to know about that. So you need to have capacity on tap, not only power and cooling and space, but also telco. So it kind of wakes up the data center ecosystem. In Luxembourg, we're used to doing business with banks. So banks, you meet them, you have lunch, you talk about it. Maybe 2 years later you sign a contract and everything starts working. They're used to projects taking 18 months, something like that. A gamer, if it takes 18 days, it's too long. So, you know, it's really waking up the game and getting things moving, but being able to shut it down in a way that everybody's happy with the way that the relationship ends as well.
Thank you. Maybe one last question here for all of you. We've heard about flexibility, latency, energy efficiency, transparency, security from David. Well, if you were to summarize the discussion of this morning with one single challenge for the next 5 years, what would you pick out? What would be the one single challenge that we should remember from this session this morning? Who wants to start?
Well, I can
António?
start. I would say energy efficiency is the biggest challenge in this area.
I would say the biggest challenge would be listening to the client. Like I said in my speech, you know, people will come up to you and say, I want this. But once you've actually whittled it down, they don't want that at all. So it's making sure that you're listening to the end client. It might be density, it might be energy efficiency, it might be security. It might be a whole mix of all of those, but I think the biggest thing is listening to the market and making sure that you can adapt to it quickly.
Martijn?
I would agree with David. Basically, the last words that you have to be able to adapt quickly. And you build data centers for many, many years. You invest a lot of money. So you have to think very, very much about how can I do this in a modular, scalable fashion, and spread my investment and still be able to meet my gaming customers' demand for 10 times as much capacity as you actually ordered from me. That is, for us, I guess, the key challenge.
All right. So flexibility, seems to me. Maybe before then going to lunch, I would like to open the floor for a couple of questions that you might have to the panelists. Is there any question from the floor that we should be taking? Anybody? Yes?
Perhaps a very brief question. In Germany, we have some discussion about the so-called locked-in effect. How do you ensure that customers can take their data to a different provider if they need to or want to?
You mean from a different data center provider? Because that would be lifting the equipment and shifting it. I guess you're more towards the cloud, right?
Cloud service from a different cloud service provider, yeah.
Past the
I think for the data center providers, it's an easy question because just moving machines from one data center to the other, if customers pay their bills, of course.
Yes.
For the cloud providers, there is a bigger challenge, which is to create standards amongst all the cloud providers so that customers can easily move their data out. And unfortunately, the scenario is not the best at the moment. So typically all vendors, although they announce they don't lock in customers, they do not provide an easy way for customers to get the data out. And until we work with government-backed or associations of companies to create those standards that all cloud providers comply with, we will not have the easiness for a customer to move from one cloud provider to another one. A trend that is already appearing is the ability to use multiple cloud providers. So spread your data or your applications or compute power or storage amongst different cloud providers so that you protect yourself against a failure. That is a workaround for the lack of compliance and standards and lock-in procedures.
I'll just add one thing into there as well. Is I agree totally with the cloud technology issues between switching between providers. Every contract that we build, whether it's data center or cloud or managed services, whatever it is, always has a reversibility clause in it. It sounds great on paper, but in practice, it's probably something a little bit differently. We spend a lot of time and energy documenting everything that happens between our clients, between our engineers, between our service account managers, etc. So that documentation and paperwork is available for each client. So if perchance the relationship breaks down and you decide to take another supplier, we will actually accompany you with our engineers to make sure that your data is extracted in a safe way. We won't format it, we won't migrate it for your other provider, but we'll make sure that you get it back in a format that is acceptable to yourself. But then my question would be, why would you want to change it once you've got a great supplier?
Well, it's not for just making a change, but sometimes you need to have several suppliers, I believe.
Sure.
If you're in a hybrid cloud, and you may just need several cloud service providers to distribute your data and to access them anytime. So a single provider may simply not be enough for your business model.
So it's a connectivity or a location issue.
Yeah.
Okay. So that kind of comes around everything again. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, is there another question from the floor? Yes, person in the back.
Thanks to the panel actually for this interesting discussions. I have an interest actually in security, particularly in data centers and cloud. And I was very interested in what David was saying actually in terms of the sort of security standards and also mechanisms that you put in place in ebrc in order to tackle the the important issue of security. I remember also discussing with someone also involved in data centers, and what he was basically saying is that, okay, we have data that we get from customers, and in theory actually we stock those data. We make them secure actually from the outside, and in theory what is within those racks and so forth, we're not meant to be knowing anything about. So I was wondering if that is something that you see, is it possible actually that you as a provider, for example, would not have an idea of the sort of information actually that you actually storing, and also if you've actually put in place this sort of mechanism that ensure that even within your employees actually cannot interfere with information.
Good question. The answer in short is yes. We have a status within Luxembourg, which is the PSF status, Professional Financial Sector, which means that we can access the client data, we can operate the platforms on behalf of the client, which gives us access to data that probably normally a service provider shouldn't have access to. That's one thing. The second thing is there is AML issues, so money laundering issues. So although we might not know exactly what your data is, we need to know what your business is in order to be able to service you correctly. As far as the actual physical data itself and the engineers on board, there's certain levels, let's say, of security that can be implemented. So if you're a PCI DSS environment, for example, the security around that is a lot stricter than if you're just a simple financial institution. We can have access to the data. It depends also on your application. Maybe your data is going to be transmitted encrypted. Maybe it's going to be stored encrypted. There's all kinds of different mechanisms that we have internally. So we have the external security, we have the internal security, we have segregation within the internal security, and then the actual processes behind that, the people running it, they also have their own levels of security as well. What I can suggest is if you want to go into that in a lot more detail, is you come and see us afterwards, and we can really explain all of the little triggers and the proper stuff, if you like.
Interesting.
Okay.